Welcome to India Sense, a show that gives you a ringside view of all that matters to India in the world of global politics and global economics. I'm Gauri Dwivedi. Let's take a look at the headlines this Friday evening. First up, after days of turmoil, Bangladesh has a new interim government headed by Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus. All eyes now on the transition towards elections focus on the Indian subcontinent, where India, US and China are locked in an intense geopolitical power play. After a wave of riots engulfed the UK with far-right groups clashing with immigrants, the Starmer government has clamped down heavily with 480 arrests and several convictions. But questions related to UK's broken immigration system remain. Kamala Harris chooses Tim Walz as her vice president pick. The race for the White House now moves to the next phase, even as questions rise about Trump's campaign hitting a rough patch ever since Harris entered the race. Days after incidents of violence were reported in Bangladesh after Sheikh Hasina fled the country, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres expresses opposition to any radically motivated attacks. Neeraj Chopra wins silver at the Paris Olympics. Chopra becomes the first athlete in modern India to have back-to-back Olympic medals. Indian hockey makes the nation proud with another bronze. It's an unprecedented week for Bangladesh. Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus is now the caretaker prime minister of the country, even as the regime prepares for a post-Sheikh Hasina era in Bangladesh. The transition for Bangladesh from here on will determine what really happens in the power competition that's underway in the Indian subcontinent between US, India and China. And that's our big story on India Ascends. The power dynamics that is at play in the Indian subcontinent and its impact from Myanmar to Pakistan to Nepal to Bangladesh to Sri Lanka. It is evident in all these countries. Take Maldives, for instance, that map on your screens. Current President Moizu won on an India out campaign, and his government is now siding with China. Now, this in an extreme case could potentially impact even the movement and access to the Indo-Pacific, a possibility that impacts both India and the US. Move forward, take a look at Pakistan. To the US, it's still perceived as a key partner to remain relevant in Afghanistan. It's also being offered truckloads of loans and money by China for precisely this reason, that Pakistan is important for US and it's important for India because it is part of its strategic and security calculus. Take a look at Nepal, where prime ministers are practically playing musical chairs. The current PM, Oli, has been the PM for the third time in 9 years, has a history of being hostile to India. In the past, he laid claims to areas that lie at the tri-junction with India and China, the one which is one of the routes to Mansarovar. So that again is where you see India-China engaged in a power play. Same is the case with Bhutan, where China has been using its checkbook to get access to this strategically important Doklam region. And India continues to build on its strong and historic ties that it shares with Bhutan in trade, transport, people-to-people areas. Now let's move on to Colombo, another country at the Indo-Pacific where the power play is happening. It needs large funds to continue its economic revival. China's loans are the very reason why Colombo is in the economic misery that it is, but it has a compromised public finance, which means it can go back to China. So how do you counter it? Competitive or probably collaborative funding, aid, grants is what is needed from India and the US to be part of this power play and to be a significant player. Now let's move on to Bangladesh, where China, India and the US have differing goals and they have differing approaches to achieve those. India backed the January election, US did not. In fact, in this mess, China swooped in and has been doing so for the last decade. What has it done? It didn't get into the election. It ensured that it provided Dhaka with submarines and its very first submarine base. And that's the important, that in the immediate India needs to focus on the long land border it shares with Bangladesh, the longest, and also prepare for a humanitarian challenge. But the long term, countries that sit on key connectivity routes and strategic points on the Indo-Pacific are essentially playing big powers amongst each other. And India needs to get this power dynamics right. US sanctioned Awami League leaders after the January elections this year in Bangladesh, but did not do so when it happened in Pakistan, where the army rigged the election completely. Why? Because for the US, it's not the election per se that matters. It's the hedging of its strategic risks in the region that matters, because it is engaged in this deep power play in the Indian subcontinent. And India needs to now do the same, ace its game. Visit to the Maldives by Foreign Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar is a first and good step, but it needs to build on this further. Let's move on and now take a look at the first wide-angle story on the show, the mess that's unfolded on the streets of UK. The last riot that took place in London was in 2011. It was triggered when a black man was killed by the London police. But in 13 years, a lot has happened and a lot has changed in England. Its polity is now fractured, the divisions on immigration have only sharpened, and while the UK may have exited the EU, it is not insulated from the undercurrent of the anti-immigrant sentiment that is brewing across Europe. The attacks on immigrants and the far-right protests that spread to 17 cities is testimony to just that. 110 police officers were injured. The riots also led to widespread protests, 483 arrests, 149 charged. The visuals of looting and riots in a first world country led to India issuing an advisory for its citizens. But the larger issue is immigration and how it's a political hot potato now in the UK. Now, whether it's for Keir Starmer or his predecessor, Rishi Sunak, immigration reform is the biggest policy area that is yet to be addressed. Indians form the largest chunk of immigrants. So whatever Keir Starmer decides impacts us. How UK decides on this issue has huge ramifications for us. But take a look at this report to know how immigration issue has been brewing for the last 15 years with absolutely no solution for government after government. It was in 2010 that the then Prime Minister of UK, David Cameron, had pledged to cut net migration in the country to less than 1 lakh, a figure he never managed to come anywhere close to. 6 years later, Cameron took the Brexit gamble, in the hope that UK would be able to take control of its borders. But as he left 10 Downing Street for better times, record migration levels caused the system to burst at its seams. In 2016, net migration to the UK stood at 2.52 lakh. This figure climbed to 4.66 lakhs by 2021 and jumped to 7.45 lakh by 2022. Clearly, Rishi Sunak's Stop the Boats campaign did little to actually stop the boats, even though he sent those coming from Rwanda route back. Sunak also stopped international students from bringing family members. He hiked salary threshold for skilled worker visas by 50% and restricted care workers from bringing in their dependents. But the failure of these policies had been a precipitating factor in birthing political parties like Reform for UK, a far-right political outfit that is against immigration. Britain spends £3 billion annually on processing asylum applications and £8 million daily in housing migrants in hotels that were attacked by rioters. It was one such hotel that was attacked and started the cycle of arson and violence, and has blurred the lines between legitimate immigration and asylum seekers. Where it ends will decide the fate of a lot of Indians that legitimately move to the UK every year. Facing a crisis of this magnitude within his very first month in office, Prime Minister Keir Starmer may choose to continue with the existing measures that were put in place by the previous Sunak government. Ad hoc measures to check illegal immigration do little to really address the larger problem. and which is that UK is facing skilled labour shortage that is impacting sector after sector, and a continued status quo hits India hard. India constitutes the largest category of immigrants. This means that the graduate route will remain unchanged, but the wait for lakhs of students and care workers to bring in their dependents to the UK may grow longer. Starmer proposed a reform, but what the UK may get is continuation of the previous government's ad hoc measures, and what is needed is a comprehensive look at UK's immigration programme. Second wide angle on the show. Well, it's been less than 3 weeks that Joe Biden exited the race and instead endorsed his Vice President Kamala Harris for the top job. Harris's Vice President candidate is now Tim Walz. In fact, his selection has not caught any by surprise. He's a low-profile Midwesterner. He's a former high school teacher. Tim Walz will remain in the shadow of Kamala Harris. And just like Harris, not much is known about Tim Walz and his foreign policy stances, particularly on thorny issues like the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict or the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is in its third year. And that's our second wide-angle story this week. What should the world expect from Team Harris? Will Team Harris be a continuation of the Biden foreign policy agenda, or could there be some major changes to that? In fact, it's less than 100 days to go for US elections, and the race is now neck to neck, with some polls giving Kamala Harris a slim lead over Donald Trump. To discuss this next phase of the US elections and what happens as far as Team Harris's agenda going forward is concerned, I'm joined by Rick Rosso, Senior Advisor at CSIS, joining us live on NDTV. Thanks much, Rick, for joining us on this program. My first question to you is that as we talk about what lies ahead in terms of the specifics of this case, what does it mean as far as Team Harris's agenda for India is concerned?
Yeah, it is a bit of a black box. Despite Kamala Harris having Indian heritage, she's never really kind of embraced a powerful leadership role in the administration or her time on Senate, occasionally voicing, because, of course, she has that nuance and understanding of India better than what you'd see from a lot of candidates, but never really embraced it and wrapped herself up as trying to be a leader in Washington on that topic. And as governor of Minnesota, Governor Walz, of course, very, very similar, not really a lot of opportunities. So I think a lot of what you're going to see from a Harris administration, should that come to pass, is going to be defined a little bit more by the candidates they choose for different cabinet roles, for the National Security Council, things like that. I think those are the people that day to day are really going to choose the direction and tenure in terms of what we're doing with India in the coming years, should there be a Harris administration. And I think under that, I think it's easy to kind of expect that we'd see basically a bit of a status quo. I think they'll probably take over a lot of the ideas and initiatives from the Biden administration, meaning that relatively positive on trade, very forward-leaning on defense and security, but still occasionally bringing up concerns about human rights and things like that. So I think that's probably the status quo we can kind of understand, but some of it will be driven by individual personalities that get appointed into the administration.
It's a bit of a black box as far as what Kamala Harris will come up with. But a lot of people say that it's actually honeymoon period for Kamala Harris right now, early days into the campaign, but it may end soon. And then what she's looking at is probably a competition that's going down to the wires. Do you think it's going to be a stiff election?
Yeah, you've always got a bit of a bump when you have somebody new that doesn't have, quite the same long governance track record. With Biden, it's easy to point to a few victories, but a lot of areas where maybe they fell short of people's expectations. So as we've seen, incumbent presidents tend to have relatively low ratings when it comes to re-election time, even though, several candidates have actually won re-election in recent years, not Trump, but the previous presidents. So, you get a bit of a bump when you have a new candidate, when you have a new vice presidential candidate. You can expect that to fade to some extent. But we still have a relatively long road ahead, plenty of opportunities for both candidates to say things that could help or harm if they ever do figure out an opportunity to get together for a debate. I mean, just look, we've had, one presidential debate, and that changed dramatically the course of the election. So So I do think that, status quo, there's an opportunity, I think, to lose a bit of steam, but a lot of opportunities to regain it and find new areas that are going to actually impact, what we have for the final result, including, again, if they manage to find an opportunity to debate each other directly on stage.
If one were to compare Team Harris and Team Trump, how do you see them on some of the important priorities and focus areas when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to India?
Well, I think, a Trump administration, you would expect, as we saw before, to be a lot more focused on domestic constituents. Not to say that, a Harris administration wouldn't, because, first and foremost, every president is beholden first and foremost to domestic voters. But, with Trump, you saw a very heavy emphasis on that. And some of these, very tense issues that we see right now on concerns about globalization. Are we encouraging companies to go overseas when we should be creating jobs locally? Concerns about migration, illegal migration across the border, about involvement in foreign wars. That's where you actually see that really strong domestic focus begins to intervene in some of the global issues where the United States has traditionally shown a leadership role on. I think with the Harris administration, it'll be a little more balanced. I think, for instance, supporting Ukraine will remain a primary mission. I think that there'll be some appetite still, like we've seen with India, to encourage companies to consider outbound investments if it's meeting other goals like climate. Climate itself, of course, is another dramatic area where we're going to see a big change. The Trump administration was not very comfortable talking about climate change, pulled out of the Paris Accords. Democrats brought us back in. If Trump wins, I think you can expect that we're going to leave again and less leadership from the United States. So on security, I think when it comes to China, there's not a lot of daylight between the two candidates. Maybe a difference on how they speak about it, some of the actions, but not a lot of difference. But on other security matters, on issues like immigration, certainly on trade and on climate, there is where I think you're going to see a lot bigger differences depending on who wins the election.
Richard Rosso, thanks so much for taking out the time and speaking to me on India Sense. We'll keep coming back on the next course of action as far as the US elections is concerned. But with that, we're slipping into a very, very short break. We come back with lots more on the other side of India Sense. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching India Sense with me, Gauri Dwivedi. Let's take a look at now Middle East, where we get another top voice on the show. The Middle East has been on the boil since the 7th of October attack on Israel and its subsequent retaliation against Iran's proxies in the region, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. And the latest flashpoint in the escalating tensions has been Israel's assassination of top Hezbollah and Hamas commanders. And the world is now bracing for a possible Iranian response. A large-scale attack will descend the world towards a larger war, could probably even force America to come in, something that both presidential candidates do not want to do. How likely is a larger conflict? How will a volatile and unstable Middle East impact India, impact the world? And how successful will be some of the current peace efforts that are being tried by Qatar, US and others to de-escalate the situation and look at a possible ceasefire as well? Gregory Brew of Eurasia Group joins me to decode this story and the larger implications of that. Gregory, thanks much for speaking to me on NDTV. I want to ask you this, that the present situation in Middle East, how do you view that? There is a chance of an Iranian retaliatory attack as well, even as some efforts are being made as far as bringing in some de-escalation.
So I think the current situation bears quite a number of similarities with the crisis from April that ensued following Israel's bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus that killed a number of senior IRGC generals. That attack, of course, then precipitated Iran's historic attack on Israel on April 13th that involved firing more than 300 ballistic missiles and drones directly from Iran towards Israel. Now, following that attack, Iran indicated that it would do so again, that it would launch similar attacks if it was similarly provoked. And it regards Israel's assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh last week as a significant provocation, one that requires a similar response. So all the indications suggest that Iran is likely to attack Israel again, as it did in April, that it is likely to use its ballistic missile forces once again. The difference now is that there is likely to be an element from Iran's resistance front coalition, groups such as Hezbollah and the Houthis in Yemen, are also likely to be incorporated into Iran's response. Once again, this is going to be an attack from Iran directly against Israel. It is likely to come in the following days.
Okay.
And both Israel and the United States have indicated that they expect this attack and that are prepared for it as far as positioning air defense assets and other elements that would assist Israel in defending against such an attack.
But Gregory, do you think with these peace efforts being tried, the Iranian attack may be more cosmetic in nature and not so widespread and not so significant?
I think this retaliation, this attack from Iran is likely to have a number of similarities with the attack in April. But that attack, as you noted, came with a degree of telegraphing. Iran gave the United States and other regional actors several days of notice. It gave everyone ample time to prepare. And it, I think, designed the attack to largely function as a show of force to restore deterrence. I think things are likely to go in a different way this time. I don't think Iran is likely to give everyone as much notice as they did in April. I do think they are going to try harder to do actual physical damage to Israel to respond to the Hiniya killing. There is, of course, also the Hezbollah element. Hezbollah has to respond to Israel's assassination of Fuad Shukr, a senior commander who was killed in Beirut last week. So the new context, the different conditions, and the increased provocations mean that Iran and its allies need to go a little further than they did in April. That suggests a more serious attack that carries with it greater escalatory risk.
Gregory, appreciate you joining us to give us a sense of how things stand right now in West Asia. There's hope that some of those peace efforts actually lead to something positive. On that note, let's now shift gears and the inside story on India Sense this week. Well, it may be out of boredom that one may think of. Seems that is indeed the case now. New research suggests that climate change has had a fair chance and far-reaching impact on the axis of Earth and its rotation as well. The reason why we think their days are longer. Take a look at this report to know how pollution is making our days much longer than what it is. Imagine a figure skater spinning at fast pace. And now imagine what happens if she extends her arms. Well, she slows down. This is exactly what's happening to Earth and how it's spinning or rotating. Record pollution levels ever since the advent of Industrial Revolution have been planet-altering in many ways, including making nights shorter and days longer. So how have we reached here? Pollution has caused temperatures to rise, leading to melting of polar ice and glaciers. The resulting extra water has been accumulating near the equator, causing Earth to bulge slightly. And this has slowed the planet's rotation. So in just 2 centuries, humans have altered what worked for billions of years. In actual time, it could be 0.3 to 1 milliseconds, but it may increase to 2.6 milliseconds by the end of the century. But it's not just the duration of a day. The redistribution of Earth's weight has also made it wobbly. Research suggests the planet's spin axis has meandered by about 30 feet. If days continue to get longer, it is likely to impact everything related to GPS, and a wobbly Earth will be more prone to earthquakes. As for space travel, despite all breakthroughs in technology, planet-altering pollution could make it more challenging for humanity going forward.